Is Ukraine starting to push Russia back in multiple places on the front lines? Just what does this mean for the war at large? And what does it mean for Russia? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so this is really interesting to me because in the last 24 hours, we've seen Russian advances near some areas like Vimka. You could see here a small advance into a windbreak, as well as in Krasnohorivka. Again, we're seeing Russian forces make these kind of marginal advances into the city, advancing block by block. This is something Russia's been doing for several weeks, but there's two interesting several months. But we're seeing for the first time, Ukraine actually push back in some substantive amount of their territory. You can see near the towns of Terny and Yampolivka, Ukrainian forces are actually driving Russians back, especially into this kind of contested zone. Again, is this a big stunning offensive? No. Is this high value terrain they're seizing? Not really. I think it looks like it's giving them some breathing room around Terny and Yampolivka, probably because these are two cities in the low ground, and Ukraine probably needs to have higher ground to hold defensive positions. But the point is not that this is tactically significant per se. It's that when you combine it with other information, right? Like the fact that in Vovchansk, Russian forces are continuing their withdrawal. You can see here that within the town of Vovchansk, significant portions of Russian-occupied blocks have been forced back, including the fact that some Russians look like they might actually be trapped behind Ukrainian lines. You can see Russian forces here in this Vovchansk center are actually partially encircled with Ukrainian forces to their north, east, and south. So this is not the thing you would have if Russia was conducting a controlled withdrawal from Vovchansk. It just wouldn't happen. Right. Now, I'd never put it past Russia to either just sacrifice troops and leave them in place to be killed or captured. And I wouldn't put it past Russian command to be so poor that these troops' withdrawal is more of a vague direction than a really coherent plan. But generally, Russia does not fight the war stupidly. They just fight the war with the term acceptable losses, highlighted and bolded. So this could be a sign of just Russia being Russia, but it could be a sign of a breakdown in their command. And generally, if Russia's withdrawing to preserve its combat power, then leaving some combat power behind the line, so to speak, seems kind of counterintuitive. You could see here, WarMapper has another more broad summary of this area where you can see that some portions of previously Russian-controlled areas right here near Starysia, as well as near Terny in the eastern part of Vovchansk. You can see all of this is a sort of Russian withdrawal kind of happening across the board. Now, because this is so new, it seems like a lot of this hasn't yet been fully reported. Well, I say that. This looks about right, honestly. Russian forces holding this terrain here, and Russian forces also this has them actually cut off. So I think this seems proximate to correct. Likely this eastern part maybe has some larger advances. You may also have more advances near Starysia, but I think this could be a sign that things are not all hunky-dory for Putin's troops. Now, if you're interested in seeing some of the footage of the fighting here, you want to become a member at combatvetnews.com. Combat Vet News is my channel, or it's my Patreon equivalent. You guys know that the powers that be at YouTube do not like my content. I don't know how else to tell you this. It's routinely demonetized, sometimes even when I cover stories that large media outlets use their actual footage, right, and transform it in my own videos. They'll demonetize me. Sometimes I will get demonetized or sort of shadow spiked when I cover particularly political topics. So I depend on you guys for support, right? And You guys have been great. And twice a week, we find the uncensored combat footage from across the front lines. We do a deep dive breakdown into how tactics are changing and how the fighting is evolving over time. So any one of these tiers is going to get you access to that. We're going to roll out some new benefits, though, for the lieutenant and colonel tiers here in the next week or two. So be sure to get in while the getting is good. And of course, these tiers will get you the shout out at the end of the videos, and which I appreciate, I appreciate all you guys, but I especially appreciate those lieutenant and colonel tiers. So check it out. And the new video is literally dropping today, so you don't want to miss it. Okay. So the other thing that I thought was interesting, just sort of an aside, is that there is reportedly some fighting. Let's see if we can find it here in a kind of unusual spot. Let's see. Here we go. Fighting continues near Sotnitsa Kozachok. Now you can see when we zoom out, this is a small band here in the northern border between Russia and Ukraine. Not anywhere of particular significance, right? Not really on the road to anywhere. Definitely not on the road to Kharkiv. And it goes into some pretty mountainous terrain. So why would Putin choose to deploy troops here when he already had kind of a disaster in Vovchansk, right? Like, why would he even attempt to breach here, especially given the fact that U.S. policy has changed and Russian troops are no longer secure over the border, right? This doesn't make a lot of sense. It makes me think it's some kind of feint or something, because again, Russian forces really seem focused on advancing in Donetsk and Luhansk. They seem to have realized that this Kharkiv sort of opening of a northern front was just a disaster, and so I don't know. I feel like this might be some kind of feint, some kind of guerrilla move, something else. It's very bizarre and very, very puzzling. Now, in any other news, there has not really been a ton, but I do want to also just shout out that Sergei Lavrov telling everybody exactly what we already knew, right? This is the Russian foreign minister has said that Russia will not even start negotiations until Ukraine yields more of its territory. It's a precondition for negotiations, right? And said that Russia is open to dialogue with Europe only, quote, based on the recognition of the territorial realities enshrined in the Russian constitution, which, as you guys know, the Russian parliament, Putin directed them to declare the Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson oblasts as Russian sovereign territory, which is funny because it both is and isn't, depending on when it's convenient for Russia, right? It is not Russian sovereign territory because, again, Russian nuclear doctrine says they can use nukes to defend their sovereign territory. But the fact that Ukraine's trying to push it out says that even Russia knows this is actually just a bunch of hooey, right? And again, the internationally recognized borders of Ukraine mean literally nothing to someone like Lavrov. And this is, of course, reflective of the fact that Putin knows he's finally winning. He's finally in the driver's seat, making more territorial advances than the Ukrainians. And for him, these calls to negotiate are sort of preposterous, right? And he is like, hey, if you want to negotiate with me, you have to do so in a way that gives me basically everything I want. So anyway, guys, that's all I had. Thank you so much to the Colonel tier members of Combat Vet News. Thank you so much to the Lieutenant tier members. I could not do this without you guys. I appreciate you so much, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers.